When silence broke the air, the afternoon sun filtered weakly through tall glass windows of the theater, painting long golden streaks across the wooden floor. People moved in a slow, uncertain rhythm, carrying clipboards, cables, and cameras. The crew was preparing for a charity event that would later be broadcast live, an event meant to honor everyday heroes, people who had risked their lives for others. Keanu Reeves stood near the back of the hall, quiet as always, watching the organized chaos with patient eyes. Beside him, Sandra Bullock adjusted the cuff of her shirt and whispered something to the coordinator. Her calm voice carried across the noise like a soft current of steadiness. But something felt off. An unease rippled through the room. Maybe it was the heavy air. Maybe the fact that everyone had been working since early morning without rest. Keanu noticed it first. The sound of shuffling feet seemed to stop for a moment, followed by the faint but unmistakable thud of something metallic hitting the floor. His gaze turned sharply toward the far corner where a stagehand had gone pale, clutching his chest. No one moved. For half a second, the world froze. Sandra gasped, her hand instinctively covering her mouth. People started talking over one another, unsure what to do. Someone shouted to call for help. Another reached for their phone but fumbled it onto the ground. It was chaos wrapped in confusion. And in that suspended moment of fear, Keanu stepped forward. His movements were calm but quick. He dropped to his knees beside the man and checked for a pulse. His voice, though low, cut through the panic. He told a nearby assistant to grab the first aid kit. Sandra watched as he began chest compressions, steady and focused, counting softly under his breath. It was like he had done this before, like helping was second nature to him. She knelt beside him without thinking, following his lead, holding the man's shoulder and keeping his head stable. Every second stretched like eternity. When the paramedics finally arrived, they found Keanu still at it, drenched in sweat but refusing to stop until they took over. As the team carried the man out on a stretcher, the crew stood silent, their faces caught somewhere between shock and awe. Sandra's eyes met Keanu's. There was something unspoken between them, something that felt deeper than simple concern. It was as if she suddenly understood that behind his quiet demeanor was a man who could never stand still when someone needed help. The producer broke the silence first, thanking him, but Keanu only shook his head. "Anyone would have done it," he said quietly. But Sandra knew that wasn't true. She had seen too many moments in life where people froze, waiting for someone else to act. Yet Keanu never did. His instinct was to move, to step forward, even when others didn't. Later that evening, when most of the crew had gone, Sandra found herself sitting on the stage steps, replaying everything in her mind. The empty seats in the theater felt like silent witnesses to what had happened. Keanu was at the far end, packing away his jacket, and she couldn't shake the thought that there was more to his calmness than he let the world see. She walked over and sat beside him. "You didn't even hesitate," she said softly. "How do you do that? Stay so composed when everyone else panics?" Keanu paused, his gaze distant like he was searching through years of memory before answering. "It's not that I don't feel afraid," he said. "It's that I've seen what waiting can cost. Sometimes you don't get a second chance to act." His tone was simple, but the weight in it made her chest tighten. There was something behind those words, a story, a loss perhaps, that he didn't share. She wanted to ask, but the way he looked at the stage floor told her he wasn't ready to talk about it. The next day, news of the incident spread quietly through the crew. The man had survived thanks to immediate CPR. Reporters tried to reach Keanu for comment, but he avoided them entirely. Instead, he went back to work like nothing had happened, helping with setup, carrying props, and sharing quiet smiles with tired technicians. Sandra watched from a distance, realizing that he wasn't looking for attention. He simply did what he felt was right and moved on. That night, as she sat in her hotel room scrolling through messages, a video from one of the backstage cameras caught her attention. It showed the moment Keanu rushed forward, the exact second when everyone else stood frozen. The comments below were already flooding in, calling him a hero, a man of compassion, a living example of selflessness. But what struck Sandra most was how unbothered he looked even in that moment. He wasn't performing for anyone. It was pure instinct. She leaned back in her chair, her mind swirling with thoughts. She had worked with him before, had shared laughter and long talks on movie sets, but that day had shown her a side of him she had never truly seen, a quiet courage that didn't ask for recognition. And yet, it lingered in her thoughts like a haunting melody. As she closed her laptop, her phone buzzed with a short message from him. It simply read, "Glad he's okay. See you tomorrow." Nothing more. But for reasons she couldn't explain, it made her smile. Outside her window, the city lights flickered against the glass. She thought about how the world always celebrated loud heroes, people who shouted their victories. But sometimes, the real heroes were the ones who stepped forward quietly when everyone else froze. And deep down, she wondered what had made Keanu this way. What moment in his past had taught him that silence could cost a life? Her eyes softened as the night deepened, and she whispered to herself, "There's more to him than anyone knows." What she didn't realize yet was that the next few weeks would peel back layers of Keanu's life she never expected to see. And the truth behind his calmness would shake her in ways she could never forget. The memory he never shared. The morning after the event, the theater buzzed again with fresh energy. Everyone was talking about Keanu's quick reaction, though he tried his best to divert the attention. Sandra watched him from across the stage as he helped a lighting technician fix a loose cable. There was something almost meditative about the way he moved, steady, quiet, focused. Yet under that calm surface, Sandra sensed a weight that hadn't been there before. Later, when they both had a break, she joined him near the back entrance. Sunlight poured through the half-open door, outlining the dust in golden flecks. She leaned against the wall beside him. "You slept at all?" she asked. "A little," he said, his voice soft, eyes fixed on the light spilling across the floor. "You? Barely. Kept thinking about yesterday. That was intense." He nodded but said nothing. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, just heavy. Then Sandra took a quiet breath. "You said something last night," she continued, "about seeing what waiting can cost. What did you mean by that?" Keanu's jaw tensed slightly. He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to his hands, as if they held a memory he wasn't ready to face. Finally, he spoke. "Years ago, before all this," he began, "I was driving home one night. There was a crash on the road ahead of me. 2 cars, one overturned. People stood around taking pictures, calling for help, but no one went close. I pulled over and ran toward it. Inside was a man, barely conscious, and a little girl in the back seat. She was crying, trapped by her seatbelt." He paused, his breath unsteady for the first time. Sandra listened quietly, her heart tightening. "I managed to pull her out, but..." His voice broke slightly. "The man didn't make it." I still remember his hand. "He was reaching, and I couldn't..." He stopped, pressing his lips together. "The paramedic said he died instantly, but I don't know. I keep wondering if a few seconds earlier could have changed something." Sandra's throat went dry. She could see it now, the image burned into him all these years. His instinct to act wasn't built from courage. It was built from loss. "You did what you could," she said softly. "Most people wouldn't have even stopped." "I know," he said, his tone almost distant. "But that doesn't change the fact that I waited too long to pull him out. I keep thinking if I'd moved faster, maybe..." "Keanu," she interrupted gently. "You can't save everyone." He finally looked at her then, his eyes glassy but steady. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can try not to freeze next time." For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside went on. Cars honked, crew members laughed somewhere near the stage. But for Sandra, everything else faded. She understood now. Every quiet act of kindness, every small gesture of help he gave, it all came from that one night that refused to leave him. That afternoon, during rehearsal, Sandra found herself distracted. She kept replaying his story. There was a strength in his pain that she couldn't ignore. When their segment began, she watched him walk onto the stage to read a dedication for the award ceremony. His voice was deep and calm, but when he said the words, "For those who act when it matters most," Sandra felt a shiver. He wasn't just reading. He was speaking to ghosts only he could see. After rehearsal, the director announced that tomorrow's live event would include a special tribute video. The crew gathered around to review clips of the previous day. They watched the moment Keanu rushed to the stagehand's side, his hands steady as he gave CPR. The room fell silent again. Even through the shaky camera footage, his focus was undeniable. "This part right here," the editor said, pointing at the screen. "That's when everyone froze except him. That's the shot we'll use." Sandra glanced at Keanu, expecting him to be uncomfortable. Instead, he just gave a small nod. "Use it, if it helps the cause," he said quietly. Later that evening, as everyone packed up, Sandra noticed him walking toward the exit. Outside, the sky was dimming to a deep violet. She followed him, feeling something unresolved between them. "Do you ever forgive yourself?" she asked from behind. He turned, his expression unreadable. "For what?" "For not being everywhere at once," she said, half smiling, half serious. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "No, but I try to make peace with the moments I missed." They stood there for a while, the cool breeze brushing through the open lot. Somewhere behind them, a distant piano echoed from one of the rehearsal rooms. Sandra wanted to say more, to tell him how deeply his story had affected her, but before she could, his phone rang. He answered, his expression shifting subtly. After a few seconds, he hung up and looked toward her, his tone quieter than before. "That was the hospital," he said. "The man I helped yesterday, he wants to see me." "That's good," she said, smiling. "He's awake?" "Yeah," Keanu replied, but his eyes carried uncertainty. "They said he asked for me specifically. Said something about a message." A strange feeling crept into Sandra's chest, like a mix of curiosity and unease. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'd like that." As they walked toward the parking lot, the air felt heavier somehow, as if whatever waited at that hospital would uncover something neither of them expected. And Sandra couldn't shake the thought. Why would a man who nearly died call for Keanu Reeves by name? The message he never forgot. The hospital room was quiet, except for the rhythmic hum of machines and the soft beeping of a heart monitor. The man lay in bed, pale but conscious, his eyes half open, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Sandra stood near the door while Keanu moved closer, his face calm yet filled with the kind of concern that always carried more weight than words. "You're the one who helped me," the man whispered, his voice weak but steady. Keanu nodded. "I just did what anyone would do," he said softly. The man shook his head. "No," he said, each word a slow effort. "They froze. Everyone froze. You didn't." He coughed lightly, and Sandra instinctively took a step forward, but Keanu lifted a hand gently, signaling her to stay calm. After a few breaths, the man continued. "I was trying to set up the light rig. Something shorted, the whole thing collapsed. When I hit the floor, I thought that was it. Then I saw you leaning over me. It's strange," he said. "You looked so familiar, like I'd seen you before." Keanu frowned slightly, unsure what to make of that. "Maybe you have," he said, trying to lighten the air. "I've done a few movies." The man smiled weakly. "Not like that," he said, shaking his head. "Not from screens. From somewhere else." "Years ago," Sandra felt a chill run through her spine. She glanced at Keanu, whose calm eyes had suddenly gone distant. "What do you mean?" Keanu asked quietly. The man took a deep breath. "Do you remember a crash?" "A highway outside Pasadena, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. A man and his daughter. A car overturned. Keanu's body went still. The air in the room seemed to thin. Sandra felt her pulse quicken as she watched his expression change, slow realization spreading like a quiet storm. The man continued. "You pulled my daughter out. I remember your voice. I never forgot it. She didn't either." Keanu's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. His hands trembled as he stared at the man, recognizing the faint scar near his jawline, the same one he had glimpsed that night under flashing ambulance lights. Keanu finally whispered. "You're the man from that crash." The man nodded, tears welling in his tired eyes. "I heard you saved her life. I wanted to thank you that night, but they took me away too fast. I woke up later and they told me you disappeared before they could find you." For a long moment, there was only silence. Sandra's breath caught as she watched Keanu's face soften, the old guilt in his eyes mixing now with disbelief. She's alive? He asked quietly. Yes, the man said, smiling faintly. She's a nurse now. She helps people the way you helped her. She talks about you all the time even though she never knew your name. She calls you the man who moved. Keanu blinked, fighting the emotion swelling in his chest. His voice cracked as he said, I thought you didn't make it. The man gave a small laugh, tired but full of warmth. I almost didn't, but I guess I wasn't meant to go that night. Maybe I was meant to find you again. Sandra's throat tightened. She could feel the gravity of the moment pressing around them, fragile and sacred. She looked at Keanu, whose eyes glistened under the harsh hospital light. You saved both of us, the man whispered, and now you've done it again. Keanu leaned forward, gently squeezing the man's hand. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You have no idea what this means to me. She'd like to meet you, the man said softly. My daughter. She's been looking for you for years. Keanu nodded, his mind spinning with disbelief and gratitude. I'd like that, he said. As they left the hospital room, Sandra walked beside him in silence. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting orange light across the hallway. She glanced at him, his face calm but distant, as if he was walking through two worlds at once, the one before this moment and the one after. That's incredible, she said finally. After all these years, yeah, he murmured. I thought that night would haunt me forever. I never imagined it would bring me back to them. They reached the parking lot and he stopped, leaning against his car. You know what's strange? He said quietly. The moment he said Pasadena, I could smell the smoke again. Feel the heat. I never forgot her crying in the back seat. It's like that moment's been waiting for this one. Sandra folded her arms, her eyes softening. Sometimes life circles back to heal what it broke, she said. Maybe this is that moment for you. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pain and peace. Maybe, he said. As they drove away from the hospital, Keanu's phone buzzed with a new message. It was a short text from an unknown number. It read, My name is Lila. I think you saved my life once. Can we meet? Sandra read it over his shoulder, her eyes widening. That's her, she said. He nodded slowly, staring at the message. Yeah, he said softly. That's her. They sat in silence for a few seconds, the car engine idling quietly. Keanu finally looked at Sandra. Would you come with me when I meet her? She nodded without hesitation. Of course, she said. You shouldn't face that memory alone. He smiled gently. Thank you, he said, and the car rolled forward into the fading light. But as they drove toward the unknown, neither of them knew that meeting Lila would uncover a truth deeper than gratitude, one that would challenge everything Keanu thought he understood about that night. And when that truth surfaced, it would test not only his strength, but his ability to forgive himself once more. The girl from the flames, the following afternoon was gray and quiet. Thin clouds rolled across the Los Angeles sky as Keanu and Sandra drove toward a small cafe on the east side of town. The city buzzed as usual, but inside the car there was only silence. Keanu's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, yet his knuckles were pale from the tension beneath. Sandra watched him from the passenger seat, knowing he was trying to stay composed, but his mind was somewhere else, trapped between memory and fear. You okay? She asked softly. He nodded once. Just strange. I've imagined this moment for years, but now that it's real, I don't know what to feel. Maybe that's how healing starts, she said, by not knowing. He smiled faintly at her words, but said nothing. When they reached the cafe, it was nearly empty. The faint smell of coffee mixed with the sound of soft piano music. Near the window sat a young woman in a pale blue sweater, her hair tied loosely back. She looked up as they entered. The moment her eyes met Keanu's, something in her expression shifted. Recognition, disbelief, and deep emotion all tangled together. You came, she said, standing up slowly. Keanu nodded, his throat tight. You're Lila? She smiled gently. And you're real, she whispered. They sat together and Sandra took a seat a little aside, wanting to give them space, yet too moved to step away. The air between them was fragile, almost sacred. My father told me, Lila began, her voice trembling slightly. "You were the one who pulled me out that night. I was 6 years old. I still remember the smell of gasoline, the lights flashing, and your voice telling me to hold on." Keanu lowered his eyes. "I remember you crying," he said quietly. "You were so small, I didn't think I could get you free in time." "You did," she said, "and I never forgot that. I grew up wondering who you were. Every birthday, every time I helped someone, I thought of that moment. That's why I became a nurse." Sandra's eyes softened. There was something deeply beautiful about the circle of fate connecting them, one act of courage creating another. But then Lila's expression changed. Her hands trembled as she took a slow breath. "There's something I never told anyone," she said. "Not even my father." Keanu's chest tightened. "What is it?" She looked down, her voice shaking. "That night, I remember you weren't alone." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "There was another person," she said. "A woman. She was the first one who tried to reach us. She got to the car before you did. I remember her shouting for help, then running back toward the road. She slipped. I saw her fall." Keanu's face went pale. "A woman?" "Yes," Lila said softly. "She was wearing a red jacket. She tried to pull the door open before you arrived." Sandra leaned forward slightly. "Keanu," she said quietly, "you never mentioned anyone else." He shook his head, lost in thought. "I don't remember seeing her. There was smoke everywhere. I thought I was the first to reach the car." Lila reached across the table and touched his hand. "I think she tried to help you. When you got me out, she was gone. I thought she'd run back to get help, but maybe she didn't make it." The cafe seemed to fade into silence. Keanu's breathing grew shallow. His mind raced back to that night. The blur of headlights, the acrid smell of burning fuel, the sound of the little girl's sobs. But now, as the pieces shifted in his memory, something new surfaced. A faint scream, a figure in red moving toward the car, then disappearing into the smoke. He closed his eyes. "How could I forget that?" he whispered. Sandra reached out gently. "Trauma does that," she said. "It hides things to protect you." But Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he murmured. "I should have gone back. I thought I saved everyone I could, but maybe I left someone behind." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't know," she said softly. "You saved me. That's what matters." He nodded, but his expression carried the weight of unfinished truth. As they left the cafe, the air outside felt colder. Sandra walked beside him, her coat brushing his arm. "You can't blame yourself for something you didn't see," she said. "Maybe," he replied, staring at the sky. "But I need to know who she was." That night, Keanu couldn't sleep. The image of the red jacket haunted him. He went through old news articles searching for details of the crash. Hours passed before he found something, a small mention in a local newspaper from 12 years ago. Unidentified woman found near crash site. Presumed to have attempted rescue. Identity unknown. His heart sank as he read the words. The next morning, he showed the article to Sandra. "She was real," he said quietly. "Someone tried to help before me. She didn't survive." Sandra read the piece, her eyes narrowing slightly. "There's no name. No family mentioned. Then we find her," Keanu said. "She deserves to be remembered." She nodded, touched by his resolve. "We'll find her together." As they began their search, contacting old reporters, looking through police archives, something unexpected happened. One retired officer recognized the case. "Yeah, I remember that night," he told Keanu over the phone. "There was a woman. We never identified her, but she had a necklace with a name engraved on it. Marie." Keanu's breath caught. Sandra looked at him, confused. "What is it?" He hesitated before speaking, his voice low. "Marie was my mother's name." Sandra's eyes widened in disbelief. He turned away, gripping the edge of the table. "She disappeared when I was a kid. I never knew what happened to her." The line went quiet for a moment, and then the officer said softly, "Son, I think your mother was the one who tried to save that girl." Sandra covered her mouth, stunned. Keanu stood frozen, the phone trembling in his hand. The truth hit him like a wave, his instinct to act, his fear of waiting, his drive to save others. It all traced back to that night. His mother had been there. She had run toward the flames before he ever did. And he never knew. His eyes filled as he whispered, "She was the reason I stepped forward." The fire within the morning sun barely broke through the gray clouds as Keanu sat on the balcony of his quiet home. The city stretched below him, awake and unaware of the storm inside his chest. The coffee beside him had gone cold hours ago. He hadn't slept. The words from the retired officer kept echoing in his mind. "I think your mother was the one who tried to save that girl." He could still see it. Smoke. Chaos. The cry of a child. The faint outline of someone in red disappearing through the flames. He had buried that image deep for years, thinking it was just his imagination. Now he knew it wasn't. It was her. Sandra arrived just after sunrise. She didn't knock. She found him sitting in silence, the newspaper article spread across the table beside a faded photograph of his mother. "You found more?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I called the officer again. He said they found her car a mile from the crash site. She must have seen the accident and ran back on foot. There were no ID papers, just that necklace." He held up a photo, an old locket tarnished with age, the name Marie engraved on the back. Sandra took a seat beside him, her voice low. "She tried to save them before anyone else did." "She didn't even hesitate," he whispered. "And now I finally understand why I couldn't stand still that day at the theater. It wasn't just instinct. It was her. It's like her courage lived on through me." He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he could almost hear her voice. Soft, steady, the same tone that used to calm him as a boy. "What are you going to do now?" Sandra asked gently. He looked up, his eyes clearer now. "I want to find where she was buried. No one claimed her back then. She deserves to be remembered. I want to bring her home." Sandra nodded without a word. She could see it, the mixture of pain and purpose in his face. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about peace. They spent the next few days tracing old records. It wasn't easy. The accident had happened over a decade ago, and files were scattered, but Sandra refused to let him do it alone. Together, they drove from one archive office to another, flipping through faded papers, searching for fragments of truth. One afternoon, after hours of silence and disappointment, they finally found a clue, a burial record at a small cemetery outside Pasadena. It listed an unidentified woman found near a crash site, buried under the name Jane Doe. Keanu stared at the paper, his eyes glassy. "That's her," he whispered. The next day, they drove there. The cemetery sat on a quiet hillside, surrounded by tall oaks. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of earth and rain. Keanu walked slowly between the rows of unmarked stones until he found the one that matched the record number. It was a small, plain marker, weathered by years, with only a date carved into the stone. He knelt down, his fingers brushing over the cold surface. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. Sandra stood behind him, her heart breaking at the sight. She had seen him strong through everything, loss, pain, solitude, but this was different. "This was raw. I didn't know," he whispered. "You were there. You saved her before I even arrived. All these years I thought I was running toward something, but I was really following you." His voice cracked and he bowed his head. For a long moment, he just stayed there, the sound of wind filling the silence. Then, slowly, Sandra stepped forward and placed a small bouquet of white lilies beside the stone. "She'd be proud of you," she said softly. "Everything you've done, every quiet act of kindness, it's her legacy through you." He looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. "I think I finally understand what she was trying to teach me," he said. "That being strong doesn't mean being unbreakable. It means moving forward even when it hurts." They stayed there until sunset. The sky turned gold, then deep orange, casting long shadows across the grass. As the light dimmed, Keanu whispered, "I'm going to give her a name again. I'll make sure people know who she was." The next week, he arranged a small memorial service. No cameras, no headlines, just a few close friends, Lila and her father, and Sandra by his side. He spoke only a few words, but every one of them came from his heart. "My mother's name was Marie Reeves," he said. She didn't live her life for recognition. She lived it for moments that mattered. The world didn't know her, but because of her, a little girl grew up to help others. Because of her, I learned that silence should never stop us from stepping forward. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Lila's father walked up to him afterward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She saved us both," he said. Keanu nodded. "She did." When the service ended, the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in soft gold. People began to leave, but Sandra stayed beside him, watching the sky fade. "How do you feel?" she asked quietly. "Lighter," he said after a moment. "For the first time, I think she can rest. And maybe I can too." They started walking back toward the parking lot, but before reaching the gate, a young boy from the nearby neighborhood approached shyly. He held a small folded note. "Sir," he said, "someone asked me to give this to you. She said you'd understand." Keanu frowned gently and unfolded the note. Inside, written in delicate handwriting, were just 5 words. "You didn't leave me behind." His breath caught. There was no name, no signature, just those words. He turned the paper over, his heart racing. There, faintly pressed into the edge, was a small symbol, a flower etched in ink. He knew that symbol. His mother used to draw it for him when he was a boy. His hand shook as he held the note. Sandra stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Keanu, what is it?" He looked at her, his eyes wide with quiet disbelief. "It's her handwriting," he said. "My mother's." Sandra stared at him, stunned. "But how?" He didn't answer. He just looked out toward the horizon where the last light of day lingered. A calm, almost peaceful smile crossed his face. "Maybe," he said softly, "she was never really gone." And as the evening breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of lilies through the air, Sandra could swear she felt it too. A quiet presence, gentle and warm, like the whisper of someone who had finally found peace, the light that stayed a week past. But the feeling of that note never left Keanu's heart. He kept it folded carefully inside his jacket pocket, like a piece of proof that love didn't end where life did. Every time he touched it, he felt calmer, as if a quiet voice was reminding him that he had finally done what he was meant to do: bring her memory home. The days that followed were slow but peaceful. Keanu went back to his usual routine, but something in him had changed. There was a lightness in the way he walked, in the way he greeted people, even in the quiet moments when no one was watching. Sandra noticed it the most. She had seen him carry the invisible weight of guilt for so long, and now that it was gone, it was like seeing the sun rise after years of rain. One afternoon, as they walked along a quiet coastal trail, the ocean wind brushing against their faces, Sandra turned to him. "I still think about that note," she said. "Do you ever wonder who left it?" Keanu smiled faintly. "I stopped wondering," he said softly. "Some things aren't meant to be explained. I think it was her way of saying goodbye, or maybe her way of saying she never left." They reached a small cliff overlooking the sea. The waves crashed below, steady and endless. Sandra looked out at the horizon, the sky melting into shades of gold and silver. "She'd be proud of you," she said quietly. Keanu didn't answer right away. He just watched the waves, eyes distant but calm. "Maybe," he said finally. "But I think she'd remind me not to stop. There's still more I can do. I don't want her courage to end with me." Sandra nodded. "What do you have in mind?" He turned to her, his expression thoughtful but sure. "A foundation. Something small at first. I want to help people who've lost someone suddenly, people who feel stuck in grief. I want them to know they can move forward, that stepping forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying love in motion." Sandra smiled, her eyes glistening in the soft light. "That's beautiful, Keanu. And so very you," he chuckled gently. "I guess it's her, too." They sat there in silence for a while, just listening to the sea. Sandra leaned back on her hands, watching seagulls glide above the water. "You know," she said after a moment, "when I first saw you rush to that stagehand, I thought it was just instinct. But now I see it was legacy." He looked at her, his eyes warm. "You were there, too. You didn't freeze either, because you moved first," she said. "Sometimes courage is contagious." The wind carried their laughter away, light and pure. For a moment, everything felt simple again. Later that evening, they returned to the cemetery one last time. The new plaque had been placed, Marie Reeves, remembered for her courage and love. Beneath it, in smaller letters, it read, "She stepped forward when others froze." Keanu knelt by the stone and placed the note there, pressing it gently into the soil. "You can rest now," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me how to live." Sandra stood beside him, quiet and still. The sky above was turning deep orange, the kind of glow that looked almost unreal. Keanu looked up, his eyes reflecting the light. "I used to think courage meant running into danger," he said softly. "Now I know it's about walking through pain and still choosing kindness," she smiled. "That's the kind of courage the world needs more of." He nodded slowly, feeling a peace he hadn't known before. As they began to walk away, the wind picked up again. The lilies on the grave shifted gently, one petal lifting into the air and floating toward the horizon. Sandra watched it drift upward, catching the last of the sunlight before vanishing into the golden glow. She turned to him and said quietly, "Sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes its shape." Keanu smiled, his eyes fixed on the fading petal. "Yeah," he said softly. "And sometimes it keeps us moving long after we think we've stopped." Months passed, and true to his word, Keanu launched the Marie Reeves Foundation. It began with a simple idea: free counseling and emergency aid for families affected by sudden loss. Soon, volunteers came forward, donations grew, and lives began to change. He didn't seek attention for it. He only showed up, quietly, humbly, doing what his mother once did, stepping forward when others froze. Sandra stood by him through every stage. She helped organize events, met with families, and sometimes simply sat beside him during the long nights when memories crept in. They didn't need to speak much. Silence had become its own kind of friendship between them, a shared understanding shaped by loss and rebuilt with compassion. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, they returned to the same cafe where they had first met Leela. The same corner table by the window, the same soft piano music playing in the background. Lila was there too, smiling warmly as she brought them coffee. "You've changed more lives than you realize," she said to Keanu. He smiled back. "So have you," he said. "Your work inspired this." She shook her head gently. "No," she said. "Your mother inspired both of us." As the night fell, the lights outside reflected on the glass, making the cafe glow softly. Sandra watched Keanu quietly, the peace in his eyes now unshakable. She thought back to that first day in the theater. The chaos, the panic, the moment he stepped forward. Everything that followed had grown from that single act of courage. And now, looking at him, she realized something deeper. It was never just about saving lives. It was about awakening hearts, his own included. When they finally left the cafe, the streets were nearly empty. They walked together under the soft streetlights, their footsteps echoing on the quiet pavement. "Do you ever feel her around?" Sandra asked. Keanu smiled gently. "Every time someone helps without being asked," he said. "That's her." They stopped for a moment, the world around them still and peaceful. Sandra looked at him, her voice low and sincere. "You know, Keanu, you didn't just find your mother. You found yourself." He looked at her, his eyes kind. "Maybe both were waiting for each other all along." And as they continued walking into the calm night, the sound of the ocean breeze following them, Sandra knew that this story wasn't about loss anymore, it was about light. A light that didn't fade when the fire went out, but lived on quietly in every act of courage, kindness, and love that followed. A light that stayed,